It was a Tuesday night in Las Vegas. December. The kind of night that feels ordinary until it isn't. Inside the house, the children were asleep. Dinner had been cleared. The woman in the living room was watching her husband move through his routine. The uniform, the keys, the slow inevitability of a man heading out for a late shift. She watched him walk to the door. Then she picked up her phone. And she sent a message to the man waiting outside. Within 90 seconds, Nathan Paige was shot 5 times in his own driveway. He made it back through the front door. He collapsed on the floor where his children had been playing hours before. And his wife dialed 911, her voice desperate, her performance flawless. For 6 days, she held it together. Then the text messages surfaced, and the word contract appeared in them. And the whole architecture of her deception, the grief, the shock, the CPR she administered to the man she had arranged to have killed, began to come apart. This is the story of Nathan Paige, a man who spent his life building something, and the wife who decided, while he slept beside her, that it was worth more to her once he was gone. There is a particular kind of betrayal that this channel returns to. Not the betrayal that erupts in a moment of rage, though that is real and devastating in its own way. But the slower kind, the kind that is planned across weeks and months. That requires someone to look at the person beside them, at the life they share, at the children sleeping down the hall, and decide, deliberately, that all of it is acceptable collateral. This case is that kind. What happened to Nathan Paige in Las Vegas in December 2010 was not a crime of passion. It was a conspiracy. It involved 4 people, a 6-month affair, a coded text message exchange, a fake alibi built around a stranger, and nearly $750,000 in life insurance money. It was planned in October. It was executed on December 1st. And the woman who organized it had been sleeping beside Nathan every night in between. Understanding how we got there requires going back further than December. It requires knowing who Nathan was. And it requires sitting with the reality that some of the most dangerous betrayals are the ones that look, from the outside, like ordinary marriages. My name is Bennett, and this is Domestic True Crime. This is a new channel, and building it takes time, care, and your support. If careful, responsible storytelling about domestic crime matters to you. If you believe victims deserve more than a passing headline, please subscribe, share this episode, and leave a comment. Every single one of those actions helps this channel grow. It makes a genuine difference to what this work can become. Nathan Paige was born on February 12, 1982, on the island of Guam. If you have never been to Guam, it is worth pausing on it for a moment. A small island in the Western Pacific, it is a place defined by proximity to the ocean, to community, to a way of living where family is not a sentiment but a structure. Nathan was the 4th of 5 children born to Mateo and Carmelina Paige, and the values of that household were absorbed early. Loyalty, hard work, showing up for the people who depended on you. He was also, by every account, the kind of person who made a room feel warmer. People who knew Nathan from Guam remembered a specific version of him. At community gatherings, he was the best dancer. Not in a showy way, but with a joy in it that was infectious and genuine. He carried his heritage with him wherever he went, and that sense of pride in who he was and where he came from never left. The ocean was his other constant. Surfing, paddleboarding, moving through the water with the ease of someone who had grown up alongside it. The beaches of Guam were where he felt most at peace. As a teenager, he met Michelle. They began dating in high school, and the relationship moved quickly towards something serious. Serious enough that they welcomed their first child while still very young. There was a maturity to this that people noted about Nathan. He didn't run from responsibility. He moved toward it. Guam is an unincorporated territory of the United States, which means its residents hold American citizenship and are eligible for military service. In April 2002, at 20 years old, Nathan enlisted in the United States Air Force. It was a decision that would shape every year that followed. His first assignment took him to Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska, a dramatic transition from the warm Pacific to one of the coldest postings available. He adapted. He always adapted. From Alaska, he moved to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, where he became Chief of Weapons Loading for the A-10 Thunderbolt Squadron. The A-10 is a ground attack aircraft, heavy and deliberate, built for sustained combat support. It takes precision to load and maintain. Nathan was good at it. In 2006, he married Michelle. They celebrated the arrival of their second child that same year. His career continued to advance, training in logistics and materials management, a posting at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, a promotion to junior non-commissioned officer in charge of maintenance supply. When the Iraq War demanded deployment, he went. When it was over, he came home and kept working. By the time Nathan was approaching his 28th birthday, he held the rank of technical sergeant. He was coaching a local youth baseball team. He was pulling double shifts to supplement the family's income. He and Michelle had 4 children now, and he was building something for all of them. His colleagues at Nellis described a man who was precise and dependable. His family in Guam described a man who was warm and funny and always ready to help. His children knew him as their father. None of them knew what his wife had been planning since October. From the outside, Nathan and Michelle's marriage looked like what military family life often looks like: demanding, stretched, but held together by the common purpose of raising children and surviving the pressures of service. Michelle managed the household, 4 children, a home, the administrative weight of a military family that moved and adjusted and had to function in the gaps between deployments and late shifts. She worked in telemarketing. She kept things running. To their social circle, they appeared to be a family making it work. But the seams were showing. Nathan's brother Eric and sister-in-law Veronica later described what they had noticed at a Thanksgiving gathering just days before the murder. The warmth between Nathan and Michelle had felt absent. Not hostile, just gone. The kind of absence that is sometimes harder to name than active conflict, because it requires someone to say out loud that something is wrong when nothing has technically happened yet. Eric had also noticed the kitchen. The pantry was nearly empty. The refrigerator was thin. Nathan was working double shifts for a reason. The family was struggling financially. This was not a secret he had shared widely, but the evidence of it was visible to people paying attention. When investigators later spoke to Michelle about the state of the marriage, she confirmed the financial stress. And then she told them something else. She admitted to flirting with men at her telemarketing job. It was framed as casual, minor, inconsequential, but detectives noted it, and they began pulling on that thread. The thread led to Michael Rodriguez. Michael was 31 years old. He worked at the same telemarketing company as Michelle. His background included convictions for forgery and theft. He was not someone whose presence in a military wife's life, in a marriage already under financial and emotional strain, would read as harmless. What investigators would eventually establish was this. By the time Nathan was killed, Michelle and Michael had been in an affair for 6 months, and the affair had moved, at some point in October 2010, into something else, something organized, something with a target, a timeline, and a financial motive that stretched into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nathan did not know any of this. His phone contained no suspicious contacts, no hidden messages, no evidence of a life he was concealing. It contained photos of his wife and children. Investigators, when they reviewed it, described it as proof that Nathan was exactly who everyone said he was. He had no idea what was coming. By October 2010, the plan was already in motion. Michelle and Michael had been discussing killing Nathan for at least 2 months before December 1st. According to what Michelle later admitted to investigators, the initial conversations were framed around the idea of a future, a life together, free of Nathan, free of the marriage, free of the constraints that his presence imposed. The money would make it possible. Nathan's military life insurance policy would pay out $400,000 upon his death. A second policy would add another $250,000. Together, $650,000, nearly $750,000. That number was the foundation of everything that followed. Michael brought in additional people. Corey was 33 years old and carried an extensive criminal history. Robbery, auto theft, grand theft, armed robbery, credit card fraud. He was not someone brought in for his judgment or his caution. He was brought in because he had the experience and the absence of conscience required to carry out what was being asked of him. Jessica was 23. Her role would become clearer in the aftermath. She provided the space, the cover, and the assistance in destruction of evidence. The apartment she shared with Corey would become the staging ground and the cleanup site. The plan was refined over weeks. Several alternatives were considered. One scenario involved shooting Nathan in his car and abandoning the vehicle in an apartment complex concealed beneath a cover story. Another was worse, abducting him, driving him into the Nevada desert, subjecting him to harm before killing him somewhere remote. The desert scenario was discussed seriously enough that it was later presented as evidence of premeditation. What they settled on was simpler. Nathan worked late shifts. He left the house at a predictable time. The garage door and the driveway created a moment of exposure, a brief window between the door and the vehicle. All they needed was to know exactly when he would leave. That was Michelle's role. She would be the one inside the house. She would know the schedule. She would signal the men waiting outside. The language they used in their texts, the contract, the client, Van Dyke, was cover, thin enough to be deniable if anyone glanced at a screen, specific enough to coordinate a killing. Nathan, during all of this, was working double shifts, coaching baseball, trying to stabilize the household finances, coming home to a wife who was signaling his movements to the man waiting to end his life. Domestic true crime is a new channel, and stories like Nathan's take weeks of careful research to tell accurately and responsibly. If this work matters to you, if you believe this kind of attention to victims and their stories is worth something, please support the channel. Subscribe. Share this episode with someone who should hear it. Leave a comment. Every one of those things helps this channel grow and keeps this work going. December 1st, 2010 began without any particular signal that it would be the last day of Nathan Paige's life. Michelle had come home earlier than usual that afternoon, not feeling well. The family had dinner together. The children settled into the evening. Nathan, following his routine, dozed off on the living room couch for a short nap before his shift. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that passes for peace. When Nathan's alarm failed to go off, he woke abruptly just before 11 p.m. He was late. He moved quickly, pulling on his camouflage uniform, gathering his things, heading for the door. It was around 11:30 when he stepped outside. Outside, in the darkness across the street, near two vacant homes that sat dark and empty, someone was waiting. Investigators would later establish that Corey had positioned himself there. He knew Nathan's schedule. He knew the driveway. He knew the window. At 11:12 p.m., 18 minutes before Nathan stepped outside, Michael had texted Michelle. He said he hoped she was feeling better. He said he was about to finish the Van Dyke contract. He said it had been such a headache, but he would have it done by morning. 2 minutes later, a second message. Thank you for your help. Get some rest. When Nathan didn't leave at the expected time, Michael began checking in. And at 11:19 p.m., as Nathan was rushing to dress and get out the door, Michelle replied. She said she had taken her medication and was going back to sleep. She mentioned that her husband had just left, and then she added that the contract being late was a nuisance. She had just told them he was coming. Moments later, multiple gunshots broke the quiet of the neighborhood. Nathan was struck 5 times. He managed to turn around. He made it back through the front door. He collapsed on the floor, inside. Michelle called 911. She told the dispatcher her husband had been shot. She followed instructions to perform CPR. First responders arrived within minutes. Nathan was pronounced dead at the scene. In the garage, blood marked the walls, the floor, the workout bench. Inside Nathan's car, more. His uniform, the camouflage he had pulled on in a rush because he was running late, lay on the floor where paramedics had cut it from him. His wallet was untouched. His keys were still in his pocket. Nothing had been taken. The first investigator at the scene noted this immediately. This was not a robbery. Someone had come here specifically for Nathan Paige. The initial lines of inquiry were standard. Gambling debts, financial disputes, a possible affair, a personal conflict that might have made Nathan a target. But within hours, each of those angles closed. His phone was reviewed. No suspicious contacts. No secret financial transactions. No second life. Just the photographs of his family that his colleagues and relatives had already described as characteristic of him. Canvassing the neighborhood yielded 2 consistent details. A black car had been seen speeding away after the shots, and a man in a brown or tan hoodie had been spotted, leaving the area on foot. Then Nathan's family arrived from Guam. Mateo and Carmelina Paige boarded the first available flight across the Pacific. Carmelina wept the entire journey. When she arrived at the house and Michelle collapsed into her arms, she held her. She didn't yet know what detectives were already beginning to suspect. Nathan's brother Eric and his wife Veronica were also there. Investigators asked them about the marriage. Veronica described what she'd noticed at Thanksgiving. The warmth between Nathan and Michelle had been absent in a way that struck her at the time, but that she'd attributed to stress. Eric mentioned the near-empty kitchen. When detectives returned to Michelle with these observations, she confirmed the financial difficulties. She then made another admission. A co-worker drove a car resembling the black vehicle seen near the scene. And she acknowledged, carefully, that she had been flirting with men at work. That co-worker was Michael Rodriguez. When police approached Michael, he was cooperative in manner and denied everything in substance. He said there had been nothing romantic with Michelle, and he had had nothing to do with the murder. He offered an alibi. He had met a woman named Shannon at a department store, and they had checked into the Sunset Station Hotel together around 11 p.m. His timeline, if accurate, placed him far from the crime scene. Detectives began to verify it. In the meantime, they pulled the text messages between Michael and Michelle, and the word contract appeared. And then Van Dyke. And the timestamps aligned with the final minutes before Nathan walked out of his house. The language was thin cover, but it was cover. They needed it to crack before they could move. It cracked when Shannon came forward. She had been approached by Michael. She had been told the men were going after a heroin dealer that night, and she was asked to provide an alibi, a small amount of money, in exchange for confirming his story. She agreed. She didn't fully understand, she said, what she was covering for. But that night, at Jessica and Corey's apartment in Henderson, she began to understand. Michael and Corey left around 11 p.m. in a black Cadillac. While they were gone, Jessica lit the fireplace. When the men returned, Shannon watched them move with purpose. Clothing fed into the fire, phones destroyed, including hers, to tie her to their story. Bleach applied to surfaces. Air freshener sprayed through the rooms. And then one of the men said something she could not unhear. He admitted he had shot Nathan. Shannon went to investigators. She was tearful and frightened. Her account was detailed and specific. Surveillance footage from the Sunset Station Hotel was pulled. Michael and Shannon had checked in, but not at 11 p.m. They had arrived roughly 40 minutes after the shooting. His alibi was false. The timeline collapsed. A search warrant was executed on Jessica and Corey's apartment. Inside, latex gloves, bottles of air freshener from the brand Shannon had described, and the remnants of burned clothing in the fireplace. Every detail she had given them was there. Investigators returned to Michelle for a final round of questioning. She confessed. Michelle admitted to the affair. She admitted that Michael had been the one to push for Nathan's death. She acknowledged that together they had planned a future contingent on Nathan being gone. The financial picture she revealed was stark. As a military widow, she was entitled to $400,000 from Nathan's military life insurance policy and an additional $250,000 from a separate policy, $650,000, a sum that investigators noted would eliminate the financial pressures that had been visibly straining the household. She said the planning had begun in October 2010. She said she knew, on the night of December 1st, that Michael and his associates were outside waiting for Nathan to leave. She said the text messages coded in the language of contracts were exactly what investigators suspected, signals to let them know when Nathan was coming. Then she offered a mitigation she had clearly prepared. She said she had tried to stop it. She said she had never unlocked Nathan's truck, as she had been asked to. She said she had deliberately turned off his alarm, hoping he would sleep through his shift and miss the window the men outside were waiting for. Investigators did not believe her. The text messages did not support the account of a reluctant participant. They supported the account of someone who knew the plan, had helped shape it, and on the night it was executed, had confirmed the signal that sent a man out to his death. At 11:19 p.m., the moment she texted that her husband had just left, and that the contract being late was a nuisance, Nathan was still inside. He had approximately 90 seconds. Michelle had given those 90 seconds to the men waiting in the dark. On December 7, 2010, a memorial service was held at the chapel of Nellis Air Force Base. It was a private ceremony. Nathan's parents were there. His siblings, his fellow service members, many of whom had served alongside him through deployments and the daily grind of military logistics. His 4 children were there. Michelle was not. Nathan's brother Eric stood at the service and described his brother as someone who supported every person around him and seemed constitutionally incapable of making an enemy. He was remembered as a devoted technical sergeant, a proud airman, a man who had worn his heritage and his uniform with equal seriousness. The morning after the memorial, December 8th, detectives arrested Michael Rodriguez, Corey, and Jessica. All three were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. On December 9th, Michelle Paige was taken into custody. She was charged with armed criminal action, conspiracy to commit a felony, and conspiracy to commit murder. She was placed under close supervision at the Clark County Detention Center due to concerns she might attempt self-harm. 6 days. From the night Nathan was killed to the moment all four conspirators were in custody. The case had taken less than a week to unravel. Nathan's parents, who had flown from Guam to hold a grieving daughter-in-law, were now sitting with the knowledge of what that daughter-in-law had done. Carmelina had wept across the Pacific for a son she had lost. Now she had to find a way to hold together four grandchildren who had watched their father die on the floor of their home. All four accused pleaded not guilty before a grand jury. Prosecutors indicated the Capital Punishment Review Committee would evaluate whether the death penalty should be pursued. Years of procedural delays followed, as the defense argued it could not proceed until that question was settled. By 2015, the legal process began to move. In September, Michael Rodriguez entered a plea. Facing the possibility of execution, he agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a sentence of life in prison with no possibility of parole. The deal avoided the death chamber. It did not avoid the rest of his life behind bars. The following month, Michelle appeared in court. Across the room, Nathan's parents sat and watched their daughter-in-law stand before a judge. She was crying. She told them she was sorry. She told the court she was sorry. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and to first-degree murder with a deadly weapon. Her defense argued she had been under Michael's influence, that the affair had clouded her judgment, that she had ultimately been controlled by a man more experienced in violence than she was. The prosecution responded precisely. The text messages showed intent, planning, and active participation. She had not been coerced into the conspiracy. She had helped architect it. In 2016, Corey also pleaded guilty. His attorney requested the possibility of eventual parole. The judge denied it directly. He called Corey a continuing danger to society. Life without parole. Jessica pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Her participation, providing the space, helping destroy evidence, coordinating the alibi, resulted in a significantly lighter sentence, reported as house arrest. A disparity that did not go unnoticed. The final sentencing, the one the courtroom had been waiting for, came on March 3, 2016. Michelle stood before the judge again. She cried again. She said Nathan had been a good man. She said her choices had been unforgivable. She asked Nathan's parents, the people who had flown across the Pacific to hold her, who had welcomed her into a family she had destroyed, to find forgiveness for her someday, if they could. The prosecution addressed the court about what the evidence actually showed, not a lonely wife overwhelmed by circumstance. A woman who had used the tools available to her, her marriage, her position in the household, her knowledge of Nathan's schedule, the emotional and financial leverage of the affair, to orchestrate the death of a man who had spent his life trying to provide for her and their children. The judge spoke at length before sentencing. He said he struggled to comprehend how someone could sleep beside another person night after night, knowing they were planning that person's death. He called her actions incomprehensible and deeply insidious. He rejected the defense's framing of her as a woman who had been swept along by a more dominant personality. She had been, he said, a major participant, not a victim. Michelle Paige was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the same hearing, Carmelina Paige was granted guardianship of Nathan's 4 children. She said she had chosen, as a woman of faith, to forgive Michelle, not for Michelle's sake, but for her own. But she also said clearly that the damage done to the children was something beyond forgiveness in the ordinary sense. They were still in trauma. They flinched at loud sounds. They were afraid, in ways that therapy had not resolved, that their mother might one day hurt them too. Nathan Paige was 28 years old. He had spent the years of his adult life building something that required sustained sacrifice, a career, a family, a home, a future. He worked double shifts so the pantry would be fuller. He coached the neighborhood kids on weekends. He came home from Iraq and kept going. He had no hidden life. His phone was full of photographs of the people he loved. What his case makes visible is something that domestic homicide researchers have documented consistently. The period during which a marriage is ending, or when one partner is planning an exit, is often the most dangerous period for the other. Not because the couple is fighting, but because the person planning the exit has calculated the cost of leaving in conventional terms and decided it is higher than another option. The insurance money made Nathan's death financially rational to the people who planned it. That is a sentence that is hard to sit with, but it is accurate. And understanding it is part of understanding why this kind of crime happens. Not in a burst of emotion, but in a spreadsheet logic applied to a human life. The children Nathan left behind will grow up knowing he was murdered by their mother. That knowledge will shape them in ways that no sentencing outcome can address. Carmelina Paige, who flew across the Pacific to grieve a son and ended up raising his 4 children, has carried that weight since December 2010. Nathan's memory, at the memorial at Nellis, was of a man incapable of making an enemy. Eric said it and meant it, and it was true. The tragedy is that being incapable of making enemies is not a protection against being betrayed. Michelle Paige will spend the rest of her life in prison. So will Michael Rodriguez. So will Corey. The conspiracy that was assembled across several months and executed in 90 seconds has produced 4 convictions and destroyed a family across 2 generations. Nathan's parents raised him on an island in the Pacific. They gave him the values that made him someone people trusted and remembered. They had to fly across an ocean to bury him. And then they had to go home. Not alone, but with 4 grandchildren who needed them to be something they had not planned to be at this stage of their lives. Nathan Paige was a devoted husband. He was a devoted father. He was a technical sergeant in the United States Air Force who served through a war and came home. He was the best dancer at the gathering. He was the man his brother described as incapable of making an enemy. He was shot 5 times in his own driveway because his wife had decided his insurance payout was worth more than his life. None of this had to happen. Domestic true crime is a new channel, and it exists because these stories deserve to be told with care, with the full weight of what they actually are, not reduced to a headline or a shock. If that matters to you, please support this channel. Subscribe, share this episode, leave a comment below. Tell someone who should hear Nathan's story. This channel grows 1 viewer at a time, and each one of you makes it possible to keep going. This is domestic true crime, and this case should have never happened.